君らと別れて私もすっかり身軽になる。
أن تكون هدفا مفترقا.
Rüzgar ve konakları fısıldayacaktı kulağımıza.
生命を超えた世界への揺るぎない
Che se sretneme kako proći od hartija i lubenica što se
Little sapphire blue flowers speckle the dunes. He wondered.
大家好，我是香港国际诗歌之夜执行总监宋子江。我们现在正在进行的是突围朗诵与对话香港国际诗歌之夜系列活动的第3场。香港国际诗歌之夜创立于2009年，每2年举办一次。香港国际诗歌之夜是亚洲最具影响力的诗歌节，也是世界上最优秀的诗歌节之一。今天我们很荣幸邀请到德国诗人朗·瓦格纳、土耳其诗人白江马托尔以及北马其顿诗人尼古拉·马兹洛夫。为我们主持对话环节的是玛利亚·托多洛娃教授。今天为我们做口译的是黄玉教授。我们还邀请了声音玩具乐队主唱欧夏元先生。突围朗诵与对话系列活动是由香港诗歌节基金会举办。在此我们要鸣谢我们的协办方：香港中文大学文学院、香港浸会大学传理学院、凤凰网、此刻天涯文化、南京先锋书店、左耳书店、纸的时代书店、单向空间、白夜、飞地人文美学生活空间以及艺术家徐冰先生。事不宜迟，下面我们就进入诗歌朗诵的环节。
Without further ado, let's move on to the reading sessions.
Hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to be again reading for the festival. I'm so honored. I will start with one of the long poem. I will read only part of it. It calls Wind Howls Through Dimensions. First in Turkish, and then I will read the English version. Doğduğumuzda bizim için yaptırdığı sandıklara, gümüş aynalar, lacivert taşlar ve Halep'ten kaçak gelen kumaşlar dolduran annemiz, bir zaman sonra bizi koyup o sandıklara, yol, rüzgar ve konakları fısıldayacaktı kulağımıza. Yalnız kalmayalım diye karanlıkta çocukluğumuzu ekleyecek, avunmamızı isteyecekti o çocuklukla. Sırtımızdan jiletle akıtılan kanın karıştığı uzun ırmağa bırakıldığımızda annemiz bu kadarını istemezdi. Bu yüzden o uyurken uzaklaştık diyorduk sulara. Gidişin kendisinden arta kalan her şey, herkes burada. Ben buradayım, kardeşlerim yitikliğiyle. Erkek kardeşim savaş korkusuyla. Babam burada hiç uyanmış olmasa da. Dünya eksilmiş etrafımda, bir düş sanki olanlar, uzayan ve uzadıkça acıtan. Annemiz siyah kadife elbisesini okşadığında, saçlarını düşürerek bakışlarına babamızı hatırlardı. Beyaz bir dağda olduğunu söylüyordu onun. Beyaz ve her bahar küçülen bir dağda. hepimizden büyük olan ve uzaktaki savaştan korkan erkek kardeşimiz dönmeyince bir daha, biz de korktuk savaştan. Ama savaş değildi onu bırakmayan. Gelirken yanımıza, atıyla uyumuş babamızın karşısındaki karlı dağda, annemizin yüzü azaldıkça, omuzları küçüldükçe annemizin, şaşırdık hangi dağa bakacağımıza. Evimizin uzun sofasında kadife elbisesi uzayıp gümüş başlığı ağırlaştıkça, dolardıkça gümüş kemeri, annemiz benziyordu baktığı dağlara. Baharda inceliyordu kabuğu ama ulaşamıyorduk ona. Ölüyordu, bu defa gerçekten eriyordu. Bir daha görünmedi sofada. Her kış kaybolan ve baharda ortaya çıkan bir ağaç oldu annemiz. Dövmeleri olan bir meşeydi o. İniltisi geliyordu kulağımıza. Wind howls through the mansions. When we were born, it was our mother who had caskets made for us and filled them with silver mirrors, dark blue stones, and fabrics smuggled from Aleppo. Later, she would put us in those caskets and whisper in our ears. Of roads and winds and mansions, to stop us being lonely in the dark, she would add our childhood too, to comfort us with that childhood. But when we were left in the long river whose water streamed with blood that poured from ritual razor slash on our backs, our mother never wanted such an outrage. And that is why we kept telling the waters while she was sleeping, we moved far away. What's left from that flight? Everything, everyone is here. I am here. My brothers and sisters are here with their loss. My mother with her dresses. My brother with his fear of war. My father's here, but not awake. Around me, the world has shrunk, all like a dream that hurts the longer it lasts. Our mother, stroking her black velvet dress and veiling her gaze, she said, he was on a white mountain getting smaller every spring. When our brother, older than all of us and afraid of the distant war, never came home, it wasn't war that kept him away. On his way back, he fell asleep with his horse on the snowy mountain facing our father's. As our mother's face grew thinner and our mother's shoulders shrank, we wondered which mountain to look at. On the long veranda of our house, as her velvet dress grew longer, her silver hairband heavier, her silver belt looser, our mother looked more and more like the mother. In spring, her shell was bare. She was dying. Partly, she never appeared again on. Lost every winter, returning in the spring, our mother became a tree, a tattooed oak, her mourning in our ears. Okay, now the second poem and the last one. It's called Ceremonial Robes. In Turkish, tören giysileri. Gözleri gördüm. Herkes sesiyle vardı ve duruşuyla gövdesinin. Bir insanı en iyi sevişirken tanırız. Kalbimizi birlikte çürütürken, ağırlaşan gövdemiz gece uyandırır. Mezar gibidir avlulu evler. Çocukluk bir uykudur, uzun sürer. Ve dokunmak için bir arzu sürükler bizi ölüme. Ben kendimi sınadığım her gövdede, ben kendimi bıraktığım her şehirde, içime aldığım göğünü ülkelerin ve boşluğunu görünce çürümüş tören giysileri içinde askıda salınan kökler. Biz denize düşürsek de ateşi o hep yanar. Issızlık bahşeder, karanlığa yanar. Tarih bir yanılgı olabilir diyor şair. İnsan bir yanılgıdır diyor Tanrı. Çok sonra bu toprakların kalbi kadar çürümüş bir sonrada insan bir yanılgıdır diyor Tanrı ve düzeltmek için varım ama geciktim. Ölü kızıl suyun dalgası, gece yürünen yol ve yolcuların dağıldığı zavallı yeryüzü, salınan beyaz kefenler, tören giysileri ve bir koşu için gerekli tek şey akın yelesidir. Asıl olan şimdi ve burada çürüyüp kaldık. Tanrı görmesin harflerimi. İnsan bir hata diyor durmadan ve hatasını düzeltmek için acı veriyor. Sadece acı. Now English version. In the cold, decayed heart of these lands, I saw eyes. Everyone was there with their voice and their body's pose. We know someone best while making love, when we corrode our hearts together. Growing heavy, our body wakes us in the night. Houses with courtyards are like graves. Childhood is a sleep long-lasting, and the yearning to touch, a yearning drags us towards death. I tasted myself in everybody. I abandoned myself in every city. I took the skies of countries to my heart, and when I saw the emptiness of my heart, I said, time to go. Inside the moldering robes of ceremony, roots sway on the hanger. Even if we drop fire in the sea, it will burn forever. It burns a gift of desolation to the dark. Perhaps history is a mistake, says the poet. Mankind's a mistake, says God. Much later, in a future corrupt as the heart of these lands, mankind's a mistake, says God. I'm here to correct it, but too late. The wave of red, lifeless water, the road followed that night, poor earth strewn with travelers, the white swaying shrouds, ceremonial robes. The only thing needed for a race is the horse's mane. This is the truth. Now we are here, rotted away in a rock. God must not see the letters of my script. Mankind's a mistake, he keeps saying, and to correct his mistake, he gives sorrow, only sorrow. Thank you.
Teebeutel. 1. Nur in Sackleinen gehüllt, kleiner Eremit in seiner Höhle. 2. Nichts als ein Faden führt nach oben. Wir geben ihm 5 Minuten. Teabag. 1. Draped only in a sackcloth mantle, the little hermit in his cave. 2. A single thread leads to the upper world. We shall give him 5 minutes. Thanks for having me. That was a brief double haiku to begin with. The next poem is dedicated to a very small yet powerful insects. Versuch über Mücken. Als hätten sich alle Buchstaben auf einmal aus der Zeitung gelöst und stünden als Schwarm in der Luft. Stehen als Schwarm in der Luft, bringen von all den schlechten Nachrichten keine. Dürftige Musen, dürre Pegasusse summen sich selbst nur ins Ohr. Geschaffen aus den letzten Faden von Rauch, wenn die Kerze erlischt, so leicht, dass sich kaum sagen lässt, sie sind, erscheinen sie fast als Schatten, die man aus einer anderen Welt in die unsere wirft. Sie tanzen, dünner als mit Bleistift gezeichnet, die Glieder, winzige Sphinxenleiber, der Stein von Rosetta, ohne den Stein. An essay on midges. As if all the letters had suddenly floated free of a paper and formed a swarm in the air. They form a swarm in the air. Of all that bad news telling us nothing. Those skimpy muses, wispy Pegasuses, only a buzz with a hum of themselves, made from the last twist of smoke as the candle is snuffed. So light you can hardly say they are, looking more like shadows, ombre, jettisoned by another world to enter our own. They dance, their legs finer than anything pencil can draw. With their minuscule sphinx-like bodies, the Rosetta Stone without the stone. Champignons. Wir trafen sie im Wald auf einer Lichtung. 2 Expeditionen durch die Dämmerung, die sie stumm betrachteten. Zwischen uns, nervös, das Telegraphensummen des Stechmückenschwarms. Meine Großmutter war berühmt für ihr Rezept der Champignon farci. Sie schloss es in ihr Grab. Alles, was gut ist, sagte sie, füllt man mit wenig mehr als mit sich selbst. Später, in der Küche, hielten wir die Pilze ans Ohr und drehten an den Stielen, wartend auf das leise Knacken im Innern, suchend nach der richtigen Kombination. Mushrooms. We came across them in a forest glade. 2 expeditions in crepuscular light, mutely eyeing each other. Between us, the telegraphic whine of swarming gnats. My grandmother was famed for her recipe for champignon farci. She locked it away in her grave. All that is good, she told us, should be filled with little more than itself. Later, In the kitchen, we held the mushrooms to our ears and turned their stems, listening for the gentle snap within, hoping for the right combination. The English translations have been done by Ian Galbraith and David Keplinger. This is the last poem with the German title Versuch über Seife. Ein Stück war immer in der Nähe, folgte seinen eigenen Phasen, wurde weniger wie fast alles, stand dann wieder voll und leuchtend weiß in seiner Schale, wog wie ein Stein in der Faust, schäumte auf, wurde weicher, man wusch sich von Kain zu Abel. Einmal vergessen verwitterte sie zum rissigen Asteroidensplitter, doch ruht jetzt feucht und glänzend wie etwas, das vom Grund des Sees heraufgetaucht wird, sekundenlang kostbar. Und alle sitzen wir am Tisch. Mondloser Abend, duftende Hände. Essay on soap. One piece was always nearby, followed its own phases, diminishing like almost everything does. Then stood again full and luminously white in its bowl. Weighed like a stone in the fist, in a froth it became softer. One washed oneself from Cain into Abel. Once it was forgotten, it weathered into a fissured asteroid splinter, but rests now moist and shiny, like something from the bottom of the lake that's been quarried, precious for those seconds, and we have gathered at the table. Moonless evening, fragrant hands. Thank you.
Сенките не одминуваат. Еден ден ќе се сретнеме како бродче од хартија и лубеница што се лади во реката. Немирот на светот ќе биде со нас, со дланките ќе го помрачиме сонцето и со фенер ќе се доближуваме. Еден ден ветрот нема да го промени правецот, брезата ќе испрати лисје во нашите чевли пред прагот и волците ќе тргнат по нашата невиност. Пеперутките ќе го остават својот прав врз нашите образи. Една старица секое утро ќе раскажува за нас во чекалната и ова што го кажувам е веќе кажано. Го чекаме ветрот како две знамења на граничен премин. Еден ден сите сенки ќе не одминат. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to hear again, to see you again, to read with those two wonderful poets. I appreciate a lot. Thank you, Maria. And I would like to thank to all the poets around the world that have supported me in the fight, in this struggle against the monster of nowadays, the virus that I was living with and struggling with. And poetry was the way to keep the moments of life closer to the light of the day. Shadows pass us by. We'll meet one day like a paper boat and a watermelon that's been cooling in the river. The anxiety of the world will be with us. Our palms will eclipse the sun and will approach each other holding lanterns. One day, the wind won't change direction. The birch will send away leaves into our shoes on the doorstep. The wolves will come after our innocence. The butterflies will leave their dust on our cheeks. An old woman will tell stories about us in the waiting room every morning. Even what I'm saying has been said already. We are waiting for the wind like two flags on a border. We are waiting for the wind like two flags on a border. One day, every shadow will pass us by. I'm sorry. Brz e vekot. Brz e vekot. Да бе ветер ке ги лупе в корите на дрвјата и фасадите на периферните згради, да бе злато ке ме крија во подруми, во ровлива земја и меѓу скршени играчки. Ке ме заборавија татковците, а нивните синови трајно ке ме паметеа. Да бев куче, немаше да ми биде страв од бегалци, да бев месечина, немаше да се плашам од смртни казни. Да бев циден часовник, ќе ги криев пукнатините на зидот. Брз е векот. Ги преживуваме слабите земјотреси гледајќи кон небото, а не кон земјата. Ги отвораме прозорците за да влезе воздух од местата каде што никогаш не сме биле и војни не постојат, зашто секој ден некој го ранува нашето срце. И брз е векот, побрз од зборот. Да бев мртов, сите ќе ми веруваа кога молчам. Past is the century. Past is the century. If I were wind, I would have peeled the bark of the trees and the facades of the buildings in the outskirts. If I were gold, I would have been hidden in cellars, into crumbly earth and among broken toys. I would have been forgotten by the fathers, and their sons would remember me forever. If I were a dog, I wouldn't have been afraid of refugees. If I were a moon, I wouldn't have been scared of executions. If I were a wall clock, I would have covered the cracks on the wall. Past is the century. We survived the weak earthquakes, watching towards the sky, yet not towards the ground. We opened the windows to let in the air of the places we have never been. And wars. Wars don't exist since someone wounds our heart every day. Past is the century, faster than the word. If I were dead, everyone would have believed me when I kept silent. The English translations are by Graham and Peggy Reed. Home, or in Macedonian, dom. Живеев на крајот од градот како улично светло на кое никој не му ја менува светилката. Па јажината ги држеше зидовите заедно, потта нашите споени дланки. Во преобразбите на невешто со зиданите камења го криев плишаното мече, спасувајќи го од сонот. Денонокно го оживував прагот, враќајќи се како пчела што секогаш се враќа на претходниот цвет. Беше мир кога го напуштив домот. Гризнатото јаболко не беше потемнето. На писмото стоеше марка со стара напуштена куќа. Кон тивките простори од раѓање се движам и под мене празнини се лепат како снег што не знае дали на земјата или на воздухот припаѓа. Home. I lived at the edge of the town like a street lamp whose light bulb no one ever replaces. Cobwebs held the walls together and sweat our clasped hands. I hid my teddy bear in holes in crudely built stone walls, saving him from dreams. Day and night, I made the threshold come alive, returning like a bee that always returns to the previous flower. It was a time of peace when I left home. The bitten apple was not bruised. On the letter, a stamp with an old abandoned house. From birth, I have migrated to quiet places, and voids have clung beneath me like snow that doesn't know if it belongs to the earth or to the air. Тишина. Не постои тишина во светот. Монасите неа ја измислиле секој ден да ги слушаат коњите и падот на пердувите од кријете. Silence. There is no silence in the world. Monks have created it to hear the horses every day and feathers falling from wings. Благодарам. Thank you. Чише.
Thank you everyone for the poetry reading, which is a really rare occasion, or has been a rare occasion in the past year or so. For me, it's the first, although online, first event to hear poetry being performed. Even though it's just on the computer, it's still live and it's still, I can still hear you and see you. So let's start our discussion now with the unavoidable, I suppose, and that's the situation today with the pandemic and the fact that a lot of events, cultural events, have been cancelled, and that a lot of poets and artists, for that matter, have had difficulties to perform their art. And poetry, it doesn't only live in books, it's also performative. It's being performed, it's being read and performed to live audiences. So with all this cancelled events and book promotions being cancelled, how do you feel the situation affects your work? Were you able to find the strength to continue writing, to continue creating your poetry? And does the pandemic situation feature in your recent poetry? That will be my first question, and I would direct this question to Nicola to start with, since he just told me before this event that he has been affected by the pandemic quite significantly. But before you answer the question, Nicola, maybe we can just hear the translation of the question, and then each of your answers will be translated into Chinese as well.
Okay, so I'll just translate Maria's question into Chinese, and then Nicola can answer the question in English. 玛利亚的问题呢，特德罗瓦教授的问题呢，是说诗歌呢是具有一定的能动性的。那么呢，不仅仅是诗歌的读者，参与在场朗诵活动的听众也得以参与其中。但是呢，在过去的2年里面呢，朗诵、宣传、书展等等的这些活动呢，都被迫取消了。那么新冠肺炎呢，是怎么样对你的这个创作工作呢有什么影响的？作为诗人，还能够找到写作的动力吗？疫情是不是已经成为了诗人近期诗作的主题 ？Maria 呢想把这个问题呢先给尼可拉马兹洛夫先生，因为他呢最近呢真的是被这个新冠疫情呢是影响的比较严重一些，所以 Maria 第一个问的问题呢就是想请让这个Mr. Mazrov Nicola, you can answer the question now. Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, what I say that I'm not afraid of distances, but their closeness scares me. And we are living on the horizon of those distances, and the only way to, in a way, to be close to the others is to see them from far away. Poetry was, in a way, kind of an introspective questioning of yourself about what you feel, what you dream, or what your longings are about. And at the beginning, we were all thinking that it's a good time to maybe start touching what is also inside yourself, not only what you see and what you hear as a signs of world's existence. But after it, we became prisoners of our longings, of our hopes. Those kind of I apologize. This kind of events from distance, in a way, also change the perspective of home. When we say home, it doesn't mean to be away from the world. It became to be, in a way, closer to it. I was struggling, and still I am, with the reason of this reshaping of the world, COVID. Spent weeks and weeks in hospitals trying to understand the silence of the people dying around me, and also this kind of urge for air, or urge for something new that will come into your lungs. And this, in a way, increased my thirst for let's say, I would put it like thirst for repeating of the world. I see under things like every kind of raising of the sun, or every kind of voice that that was coming from me, as that I was not noticing before, because it was in a way repeating of the existence of the world. I turn it from routine into ritual. Poetry and art in general helped a lot, not to maintain or not to take it or in matter of survival, but no, it was kind of language, the only language I could speak to the absence of the others around me. And this voice of art, this voice of poetry, was something that was not infected. I understood that writing, hearing the voices from the ones with the writers that were writing before, and transferring your voice into emptiness of the future, in the empty space of the future, is what kept me alive. This urge of being in the world in between time, and in this world in between languages, words, and silences.
Thank you, Nicola.
好，马兹洛夫先生他其实呢，他特别强调的就是说，对于一个诗人来说呢，他其实惧怕的并不是距离，反而是一种接近的程度，因为他理解的诗歌呢是一种对自己的欲望、感情做有距离反思的方式。诗人呢，首先呢，通过自己的所见所闻去感受这个世界，但是呢，也不能避免的会成为自己欲望和感情的囚徒。马兹洛夫先生他说到，他在医院治疗这个新冠肺炎期间呢，被迫离开自己的家，试着去每天理解身边不断死去的病人的那种悲痛之感。那么在这个期间呢，马兹洛夫呢，他反而呢，能够更好的体会到一种对于这个世界里面的那种日常的一些活动，比如说每天的日出、日常的声响的一种渴望，他反而能够呢，通过这样的体验呢，把一种日常的这种日常之感呢，变为一种仪式之感。对于他来说，这个住院的体验让他更加明白，原来诗歌和艺术呢，是更好的能够让一个人不仅仅是生存，不仅仅是存在，而是一种语言。这种语言呢，能够让这个诗人呢获得一种诗歌的声音。这种诗歌的声音呢，在非典期间呢，并没有受到影响。对于马兹洛夫来说，反而呢是让他更加的拥有了一种对于在不同的时间，在不同的语言和不同的世界之间生存的一种渴望和一种激情是这样。
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you. That was a really, both personal and more general voicing of how this pandemic affects all of us. I would maybe ask Jean the same question, and maybe also ask her not only how the pandemic influenced your writing and your work as a poet, but how do you feel the role of art and poetry in this kind of situation? What is the role of art and poetry in this kind of situations of pandemic, and not only the pandemic, but also this kind of crisis situations, situations of natural disasters or of wars that you talk about in your poetry?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just quickly. Sorry, John. Yeah, quickly
yeah.
with the question in Chinese.
Robert 的问题呢，就是说对于这个马图尔女士呢，她的问题在于艺术，特别是诗歌有什么样子的作用，扮演什么样的角色，特别是在危机时刻、自然悲剧、战争出现的时候，能够有什么样的作用和职能？作为诗人，相不相信诗歌的这种治愈的这种力量？
Thank you. Before I start, I'm really deeply sorry, Nicola. I'm very happy to see you. You're feeling better. I think all of us, we were complaining about the speed we created as humans. And this speed was ruining our life, our nature, our reality. And some says, when you are too fast, your soul, you left your soul behind. I took this pandemic time as we can meet our soul again. We can find an potential in that. For me to stop, because I travel a lot since almost 20 years, I was really traveling very often and I was kind of tired, let's say. I find this time as a gift, let's say. Only the time part, not the other part of the that's why I was quite contrary. I was very prolific. At the very beginning of the pandemic, last March, my book in English was published. I had a book launch series in England, but all the programs were cancelled. This is my book. And then I came back. Let me show you what I created during last year, 1 year, during the pandemic. This is my recent book. 2 months ago, I published it. The title is "The World is Still Beautiful." Everyone asked me, did you write this poem because of the pandemic? No, I wrote it. And they asked me how you felt this. I think this is the art in general, or poetry. Poets are like shamans. They feel with their intuitions, they feel the reality of the cosmos. And they feel the tragedies of the time, even they are not visible yet. This book is a kind of way of telling, okay, all these tragedies and the terrible things happened in our life as human, still we can feel grateful towards life, because opposite of it is that, and we are not that yet. That's why through art, through poetry, we are trying to find the answer of our truth. What is truth? Why we exist, and what is the meaning of our existence? I find like the art I am interested more is the one or the tragedies. It's not this one. It is the one who finds the solutions, who bring the solution, who bring healings like a shaman. That's why answers are always beyond and beyond is through our intuitions. We can feel it. We can try to find some answers and console our souls. This is the way I write, and this is the way I find peace in my life. And that is why I didn't want to stop at all during the pandemic. I was really active. Me and my boyfriend, he is a musician. He composed some songs, and we did an LP. Let me show you. This is my poetry and his music. It's called 7 Nights. I choose 7 poems, and this photos was taken in an archaeological place in Southeast where I born. This is also in CD format, and that was released a few months ago again. The only break I had, like 1-2 months, we were not locked down that time. I published my book, and then this was released. And that's why, let's say, I was quite active. But even though I was active, there was a lack of something. Actions, we are not complete. We need the others to create our humanity, to widen it, to expand our being. Otherwise, we become like, we become a part of nature. There is a lack of humanity, I think. The language is shrink. The feelings are getting more like shrinking. That's why never in my life before I felt the lack of communication, the lack of interaction, the lack of my relationship with nature is always great. I love walking. I write my poetry when I walk mostly. But to be stuck, as Nicola said, to feel like a prisoner, as I am experienced when I was 19 years old, I was in prison for 1 year. But this one was really, of course, not the same, but it has full of lessons. We can change our perspective towards nature, towards life, towards cosmos, towards it change a lot, I think. That's why I find it as an opportunity.
So shall we? Yeah. OK， 那总结一下马图尔女士的回答哈。马图尔女士说，在写诗的时候呢，诗人往往会觉得有一种灵魂被抛诸身后的感觉。但是呢，她也强调说，疫情呢对于她的影响呢，并没有影响到她的高效和多产，反而呢，就是在今年的3月，她已经在英国出版发行了一本诗集。然后去年她其实也是很高产的一年，所以疫情对于她的诗歌创作呢，并没有太大的影响。那么他的这个诗集呢，主题呢，其实是谈论到这个萨满对于这个宇宙之力、对于时间影响的一种呼应。所以马图尔女士她强调说，即使呢作为诗人来说呢，即使是在面对危机和自然悲剧的时刻呢，她还是觉得仍然是心怀感恩的。那么这诗歌和艺术形式呢，其实它的存在的意义呢，其实是在于让我们每个人呢，能够寻找自己本身存在的真正的意义。它的作用是 仅是疗愈，也是一种寻找在自己的灵魂之后呢，寻找答案的一种方式。那么马图尔女士觉得，在这种灵魂之后寻找诗歌、写作诗歌呢，其实是可以让她得到心灵的平静的。那么其实她也举出来一个例子，说她自己的男朋友呢，其实也创作了一个叫做7页的 CD， 那么就配合她自己写的7首诗。那么其实在疫情期间呢，她只歇息了2个月。那么但是呢，虽然她那么多产那么积极，可是她还是强调自己还是有一种缺乏之感。缺乏之感呢，就是她缺乏行动的那种感受。那么这种行动的缺乏呢，让她感觉到人性似乎有一些丧失之感，语言也似乎在萎缩。那么虽然她和自然的关系仍然保持得很好，但是她和马兹洛夫先生一样，也感受到自己有一种身在牢狱的这种感觉。这应该是由于缺乏人与人之间的有效沟通所造成的。
Thank you. Thanks, Bajan. And poet or Jan, we haven't heard from you about how do you feel this situation, the pandemic, and the lockdowns, being imprisoned, as Bajan said, or feeling or experiencing the sickness and death around you. Has that affected your work? And also, how do you feel about, or do you believe in the healing power of poetry? Can poetry heal us in this situation? Thanks. Just quickly the translation.
其实就是想问瓦格纳先生，相不相信诗歌是有治愈的疗效的啊？这样子。
Well, I suppose every answer I can give would sound banal, especially if compared to what Nicola said, and compared to experiences of people who have been terribly affected by this plague. I suppose everybody who's writing poetry and is used to travel, as Bejan said, is missing something fundamental and essential. The being with other people, that is very existential, basic situation where a group of people says, "Come in and sit down and listen." That is something I think everybody is missing, and I'm longing to be able to be with people and listen directly, of course. But on the other hand, what a great luxury it is for us that we have poetry, that we could continue with what we are doing and with what we love. That in this terrible situation, more terrible for some than for others, but difficult for everybody, we had the luxury that others don't. We could continue to work, and more than that, we could try to grasp or to put into words and to somehow cope with what we see and hear by what we're doing. That is a great luxury as well, I think. Has it affected poetry? I think, of course, it has, and at least I can say that for myself. There have been projects who try to directly focus on what's going on, where poets answer each other and write about the pandemic. But I think this sense of fragility, that sense of vulnerability that we all have experienced, this constant threat of something making us very tiny, has or is bound to influence the way we write, even if we don't write about it directly. But it will come into the poems, even if you write about a glass of water. I think this glass of water will be a very different glass of water than before the pandemic, and somehow incorporate the sense of fragility we have come to experience. And to come to your final point, yes, I think poetry has a healing power. Even if it doesn't have answers, it can phrase the questions and the insecurities we have in a way which is soothing and indeed can be healing. And it can, I think, put into focus a time of darkness in a way which can be a relief for the one writing the poem and the one reading the poem.
OK，瓦格纳先生的回应呢是说，诗歌的确是有这个治愈的疗效的，有这样的功能的。实际上在这个非典疫情期间呢，其实大家都已经比较丧失了一种沟通的基本步骤，比如说问好啊、坐下呀、基本的这种相处啊，其实都已经是非常少见了。但是呢，作为诗人呢，能够继续的进行诗歌创作呢，其实是一种很奢侈的行为，他对此觉得非常的感恩。其实呢，疫情呢的确对于诗人呢的创作是有影响的，可能是在主题上有一定的直接影响。即使是不直接用疫情作为诗歌主题的诗人呢，可能他在写作的时候呢，也会写到相关的一些内容，比如说脆弱的这个主题，比如说写一杯水，即使写一杯水的时候没有提到疫情，但是实际上也可能是跟疫情相关的。还有一种就是那种不安全的感，就是那种生活之中时刻受到威胁的那种不安全之感呢，其实呢也是时刻存在的。在这样的一个黑暗的时刻呢，写诗呢其实是能够给人一种安心跟舒缓的感觉的，这就是瓦格纳先生所谈到的诗歌的疗效所在。
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. So let me just add on that note, but also come back to your poetry that we just heard before. So as Jan said, poetry, among other things, is a witness, can be a witness of what's happening around us, and poets can witness what's happening around us in their poetry. And very often the personal kind of experiences and memories then intermingle with and create and become social memories and social experiences. And I can see that a lot in your poetry, Bajan. So your poetry kind of speaks about this personal but also social memory of events. And I also notice in all of your poetry, in all three of you, the poems that you read, this idea of trying to find a place, if I can say so, a place to belong, a place where you belong. It's very different for the three of you. You know, sometimes it's family, Bajan and Nicola as well. You know, sometimes it's home, and from Jan, I get a lot of poetry about nature and belonging as part of nature. So my question will be, and I'll start with Bajan. What is for you the meaning of home, of a place where we belong? Sorry. Yeah.
这个
I think
第一个是首先要问这个马图尔女士的。那么其实这个问题呢，也是给三位诗人的。他们呢，其实诗歌呢，对于这三位诗人来说呢，都是个人经历和感受的一种见证。那么特别是寻找自己的归属之地的一种书写。那么在白江马图尔的诗歌里面呢，更多的是一种对家庭的渴望。那么在这个马斯洛夫的诗歌里面呢，是一种追寻家园的感觉。在这个马格纳的诗里面呢，可能是一种对自然的一种归属之感。那么这个问题其实在于说，个人诗歌的归属感和社会记忆之间相互交织的时候，应该怎么处理？那么首先问一下马图尔女士哈，对于你来说，家意味着什么
Yeah. Again, as I said, all my writings, all my books, until now I have published 11 books. And all of it, I think it's about this searching of home. What is home? Because to me, home is somewhere in the past. Maybe once upon a time, I had, but I lost it. And I am trying to create the home, the land, through poetry, through words. Of course, I write from a place. I do have a certain geography. Understand what is beyond that scenery, poetry. I'm trying to understand myself. What is my connection, relation with the historical geography that I was born in? But I think it's Oxford. I think it's more than this. And through poetry, I'm trying to find the answer. I'm trying to reach the horizons of this existence of the certain place that we called home. To me, home is the place my breath become words, become a poetry, that I feel myself expand and have no limits there. There is no past, no future. There is a certain moment, a certain nature that I am in. It is like a shamanic ritual. I feel like all the construction of the scenery, the view I see around me, everything become a poem. It's like a symphony that I hear from the nature. And then when I have my pen with me, I make it a poem. This is the place that I find myself relaxed, and a part of it I call it home. But home is, as human, we don't know who we are, really. We don't know all the answers. We are searching through our writing or composing or dancing or whatever you do as art. You are trying to find who you are, really. And what is the meaning of being alive? What is the meaning of being that? I think home is something between to be born and death. A place, certain place we find and console ourselves as a human being. A summary, I think I'm still searching. And I don't know the answer. And poetry is bringing a little answer, and I'm continuing to find it.
Thank you.
对于马图尔女士来说呢，她一直都是通过诗歌创作来寻找什么是家。她提到2点，第一个可能家是过去的一个时刻，家也可能是通过诗歌所描写的一个地方。但是呢，真正的问题在于说，在诗歌的景观之后还有什么存在呢？对于诗人来说，怎么样去跟历史和地理建立一种连接呢？其实诗歌比以上所说的还要更多。对于马图尔女士来说，诗歌是能够让她拓宽自己的视野，能够让她能够无限的扩张，不会感觉到过去未来的束缚，也不会被当下的某一刻所捆绑的这样的一个让她无限放松跟扩张的这样的一种存在之感，就好像一种施行某种仪式的萨满一样。在创作诗歌的时候，马图尔女士呢会把她曾经见过的所有的景观呢都融合在一起，就好像从自然的声响里面融合出各种声响来建立一种交响乐的感觉，这样交织形成她的诗歌，最终呢在创作诗歌的过程之中呢达到一种放松的感觉。但是诗歌往往也未必是我们能够找到什么是家这个答案的一个方式，究竟每一个人都要回答你是谁，生死之意究竟是怎样，何为生何为死， 所以最后作为总结呢，马图尔女士认为呢，诗歌呀还是一种寻找的过程。这个何为家，其实是一个无解的问题，只有不断的通过创作诗歌，才能够不断的去追寻。
Staying with the same question, Nicola, you just shared with us a poem that was called Home. And knowing you, I know that you do travel a lot, and you do try to make home a different place. Well, you used to travel a lot, and try to make home at different places. So how do you understand home, or what is home for you, and how does it feature in your poetry?
这个问题是问马兹洛夫先生的啊，就是作为一个四海为家、经常旅行的诗人来说，究竟家意味着什么？家是如何成为你诗歌的主题的？
Yeah. As Jan said, that everything nowadays has a different context. Even a glass of water, also a home, have it. Bejan said also, put it beautifully, that the home, in fact, we had once upon a time this home that we know about, and it became kind of now a psychological building. In fact, it gathers all the fear of not belonging. You know, even when I was a child, I was always looking at the branches of the tree as roots. They were looking at me as just reflecting the structure of the roots under the ground. And that's how I feel all these trips in a way, trying to reach the fruits of poetry, the fruits of world's diversity. Even when I was coming to China, I was feeling home just because it was quite different. For me, even the most sterile hotel room welcomes you with this burning fire on the screen, on the TV screen, to reassure you that you belong here. No matter all these ugly pictures on the walls. And anyway, it's kind of, home now is a dynamic reality. Exactly as a tree with roots in the air. I have many homes. I was in Paris, in Beijing, Hong Kong also, Berlin. And I think nomads who had forgotten what they left behind are true nomads. We are not, because you always take something from the place we visit. Anyway, poetry becomes the only proof of our nomadic life in that case. Nomads don't believe in monuments. And we want somehow to stick on this proof of time, to touch the body of history, no matter how painful it can be. And belonging is often the enemy of rootedness. And I would end with a beautiful quote of Simone Weil when she says, "To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. Nowadays, it's really a change to die in a place where you are born in." And I would say the language is the only way to die where you are born in.
Thank you.
OK， 好， 马兹洛夫先生呢，他其实呢同意刚才瓦格纳先生说的关于一杯水的比喻，还有就是马图尔女士所说的家可能是过去的一刻，甚至也可能是心理意义上的一座楼房。但是呢，实际上，马兹洛夫先生在小的时候呢，他就会凝视树枝、树根，通过这种凝视呢，寻找一种家园之感。那么，同样的，用这样的一种凝视呢，也可以来看诗歌的根源。来寻找所谓的在地之家的那种在地感，家园的在地感。对于他来说，即使是在中国，他也可能会有一种家园之感。家园对于他马兹洛夫先生来说呢，可能是一种两难的一种现实。比如说他在柏林，他在北京，他在香港，他其实都曾经有一种家园之感。对于马兹洛夫先生来说，这种游牧者的这种身份呢，其实是很特别的。这种游牧者的身份可以让诗人呢，在自己到访的每一个地方呢，都会拿走一些东西。诗人呢，这种诗人的游牧者呢，是不相信所谓的建筑物的这种永世之感的。他们其实更努力的是通过诗歌创作了，能够寻找一种时间的证明，跟历史产生一种接触，不管这种追寻呢，会让他们觉得多么的痛苦，他们都会愿意呢去的寻找这种根源之感。那么最后，他其实是用了 Simone Weil 的一句话来作为结论的，关于这个根源 rootness 的这样的一个讨论。可能我们最终呢，还是要再通过语言呢，才能够找到自己的根源之本、根源所在、家园之感。
Thank you. And I'm just reminded that we need to end in 5 minutes, so we have just 5 minutes. And I also want to invite Jan to share his answer to this question. If I can just add that from your poetry, I saw or I heard references to a lot of animals and insects. So do you think nature is where we belong?
这个问题呢是问瓦格纳先生的，我们时间无多了，请瓦格纳先生呢回应一下，在他的诗歌里面呢，经常会写到自然的这个主题，是不是说对于瓦格纳先生来说，自然才是我们人类归属的最终之地？
Well, there are obviously different layers to your questions and different ways of answering it. On one layer, obviously, home is where a door is opened and a friendly face is showing itself, and that can be a tent, as Nicola pointed out, just anywhere. Obviously, the situation where you are somewhere and you take a deep breath and you can say, "I am home," is linked to some fundamental impressions, childhood impressions. And for me, I can point to different landscapes or types of wind blowing or a certain smell of bread, which would make me say, this is home. Luckily for us, there's a poetic home as well, and we can try to create it ourselves by choosing particular admired poets and poems to be with and to learn from, and traditions to be in. So the poetic home is something we can actually create in a way which is beautiful. And nature, as you said, that happens to be everywhere. So that's something we confront every day. Is it a home? More often than not, it is not. But to carefully study what is around us and which is linked to us in this way or another way, can be part of home, or at least it is helpful to recognize that that particular animal or that particular plant you see and you try to describe as carefully as possible calls this place where you happen to be its home as well.
Thank you.
瓦格纳先生的观点呢，在于说，其实呢，他从每一张友好的脸庞，或者是每一个我们喜欢的地方呢，都能够找到家园之感。不同的地景、不同的风 吹的方向，甚至是面包的香气，各种香气都能够给诗人一种家的感觉。其实诗歌不仅仅是一种存在的方式，也是我们学习的一种方式。那么自然在这个意义上来说呢，因为自然无所不在，那么它其实自然呢是跟我们的生活密切相关，也能够启发我们每天呢要去小心的观察我们身边发生的各种事情，各种包括植物，包括某一种动物跟我们建立的联系。那么在这个联系之中呢，其实也可以建立一种家园之感啊，这就是瓦格纳先生的观点。
So thank you all for being with us, although at different places in the world and in different time zones. But it was great to hear your thoughts, to hear your poetry. And that's the time we have for this discussion. And I'll give it back to Chris now to introduce us to the music performance that we are about to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Hello.
Hi. Hello. How do I turn it?
好，我是欧家园，然后今天非常荣幸能够参加这个香港国际诗歌之夜的这个活动。在里面我会唱一首歌，这首歌的名字叫《没有人比我们更为接近对方》。开始了。你看，心也不停旋转，而明天又该去向何方？无数次短暂的旅程里，无尽甜蜜和忧伤。你听，远处传来阵阵滚滚低沉的泪声。我们依旧不愿离开，直到雨点打在肩上。望风涛笑着，卷起尘土骤然打进眼帘，禁不住泛滥的骄傲。没有人说，默默传递香烟，分享苦潮，分享远处远美化人心的绽放。此刻，见窗外一小伞，并缓缓地下着雨，熄灭掉屏幕的画面，独自走向近的边缘。这幽暗的琴声里，试图唤起心中消失的共鸣，还有你温暖的呼吸，在远去的歌声，再也听不到它悠长的叹息，只有寂静的沉默是最后的回答。那些擦肩而过
早已两鬓斑白，心如死灰。黑暗中，我们静静地相拥，看星空闪烁。就这样，明白躺在一望无际那天的中央，直到再没有人能够比我们更为接近对方。就这样，明白躺在一望无际星河的中央，直到再没有人能够比我们更为接近对方。谢谢大家。